My stepbrother sold my signed guitar to buy sneakers, then told me you should be thanking me. At least now it's with someone who appreciates it. When I confronted him, he smirked and said, besides, you'll get over it. I just stared at him. That was a year ago. This morning, he was standing outside my office in tears. My stepbrother stole and sold my signed guitar for sneakers, and my parents shrugged it off. So I sold every pair of his collection and left him broke. I've had my signed guitar since I was 15. It's not just any guitar. It was signed by my favorite musician after I saved for months to buy tickets to his concert. My mom even helped me get backstage because she knew how much it meant to me. I never played it much. I kept it in a glass case in my room. It was my treasure. My stepbrother, Evan, moved into our house when I was 17, after my mom married his dad. Right from the start, he was arrogant and entitled. He had this expensive sneaker collection, always bragging about how much each pair cost and how they'd be worth thousands someday. But what made him insufferable was his attitude toward me. When we first met, he called my guitar nerd junk and told me, no one's gonna care about your scribbled on toy when you're 40. I brushed it off, but it stuck with me. He'd also constantly make little jabs. You'll never move out if you keep wasting money on music crap. Bet your idol doesn't even remember you exist. At least my sneakers are investments. Your stuff is just dust collectors. Over the years, Evan's sneaker obsession only got worse. He had over 50 pairs, all in their boxes, some never worn. He'd treat them like holy relics, and God forbid I even walk too close to them. Once, I accidentally brushed one box with my foot and he lost his mind, yelling that I had no respect for other people's property. Oh, the irony. Fast forward to last year. I went away for 2 weeks for a work trip. Before I left, I locked my room because I knew Evan liked snooping. I didn't trust him, especially since he'd borrowed things before without asking and forgotten to return them. When I came back, I noticed the lock on my door had scratches on it. I opened the glass case where my guitar was, and it was gone. I confronted Evan immediately. He acted confused at first. What guitar? Oh, that old thing? I thought you didn't care about it anymore. I told him it was worth more to me than anything else I owned. That's when he casually dropped the bomb. Yeah, so, I kinda sold it. My friend collects music stuff, and he gave me a great price. I figured you'd get over it. Besides, I needed cash for a drop last week. Translation, he sold my signed guitar to buy sneakers. I was shaking with rage. I told him to give me the buyer's info so I could get it back. He smirked and said, nah, he's not giving it back. And honestly, you should be thanking me. At least now it's with someone who appreciates it. I went to my mom and stepdad, thinking they'd make him fix this. Instead, I got the classic gaslighting routine. It's just a guitar. You're overreacting. Evan didn't mean any harm. Family should share. Share? He sold it. That's when I decided Evan was going to learn exactly how it felt to lose something you love. A week later, I waited until Evan was out of the house. He kept all his sneakers lined up in the spare room. I packed every single pair into my car, all 50 plus boxes, and drove them to a local sneaker resale shop. I didn't even try to get the highest price. I just wanted them gone. The shop owner gave me a decent chunk of cash for them. I took the money, made sure to get a receipt with sold by Evan, last name, written on it, just in case, and left. That evening, Evan came home and within minutes, the house shook with his yelling. Where are my shoes? I sat calmly on the couch and said, oh, those old things? I thought you didn't care about them anymore. He went pale. I handed him the receipt. Yep, figured you'd get over it. Besides, I needed cash for a concert ticket. The screaming match that followed could have been heard 3 streets over. My mom accused me of stooping to his level, but I reminded her she'd said family should share, so I shared the experience of loss with Evan. Evan demanded I give him the money. I refused. I told him I'd use it to start saving for a new guitar, and maybe he should consider his sneakers an investment in my music hobby. The best part? Without his sneaker collection, Evan lost his status in his friend group. Apparently, half his identity was tied to flexing his rare pairs online. People started making fun of him for letting his little sister outsmart him. He sulked for weeks. It's been months since then, and I thought Evan had finally given up trying to get back at me, until I came home yesterday to find my brand new guitar case smashed open in the driveway. The pieces of wood and metal were scattered across the concrete like someone had taken a hammer to it over and over again. I just stood there. My legs wouldn't move. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. And then I looked up at the house and saw Evan in his bedroom window, just standing there with this little smile on his face. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone when I started taking pictures of everything. The splintered wood, the bent metal clasps, the torn fabric lining that used to protect my new guitar. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler saying Mom and Dad were in the living room pretending they didn't hear anything, which made my stomach drop because of course they knew. They had to have heard this happening right in our driveway. I grabbed what was left of the case and marched inside, finding them at the dinner table eating like nothing happened, and I shoved my phone in front of Mom's face showing her the photos. She barely looked up from her pasta and just said accidents happen, while Robert suggested maybe I shouldn't have left it outside, even though my car was still running and my work bag was still on my shoulder proving I'd literally just gotten home. The way they both acted like this was normal, like this was somehow my fault. It hurt worse than if they just yelled at me or told me to deal with it myself. That's when Evan walked into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge like he owned the place, and mentioned he'd seen some kids hanging around my car earlier when he got home. He looked right at me while he said it, his eyes basically daring me to call him out, then added that you know how jealous people get when they see nice things, and Robert actually nodded and said something about how I should be more careful with expensive items. I was gripping my phone so hard my knuckles went white and I could feel my nails digging into my palm, but I couldn't say anything because what was the point when my own parents were taking his side? That night I went to the hardware store and bought a new doorknob with a key lock, my hands still shaking with anger as I installed it while Tyler helped me move all my music stuff into my closet. He kept his voice low and told me he'd heard Evan on the phone earlier bragging to someone about how this was just the beginning, and we both knew our parents wouldn't protect me from whatever he had planned next. The next morning at work Rebecca took one look at my face and asked what was wrong, and I just broke down and told her everything about the guitar case and how scared I was getting. She immediately said I could stay in her spare room, but I told her no because leaving would feel like letting Evan win, like giving him exactly what he wanted. She made me promise to document everything and wrote down a number for a security camera guy she knew. Said I needed to protect myself since nobody else would. 3 days later I was working from home and jumping at every sound in the house, every creak of the floorboards making me think Evan was coming for my stuff. He'd started blasting music at max volume every time I got on a video call, forcing me to apologize to clients over and over while trying to find quiet spots in the house to work. My productivity tanked because I couldn't focus on anything except waiting for his next move, checking my room every hour to make sure nothing was missing or broken. Tyler came to my room that afternoon and showed me something on his phone that made my blood run cold. A video he'd taken of Evan using a crowbar on my guitar case in the driveway. His hands were shaking as he explained that Evan had seen him recording and threatened to make his life hell if he told anyone. And now I had to worry about protecting Tyler too. The next day I came home from a meeting to find my bedroom door open even though I locked it that morning, and my laptop was gone from my desk where I'd left it plugged in. I found Evan in the living room using it to watch YouTube YouTube, and when I demanded it back he claimed he needed to borrow it for school, which was total crap since he dropped out 2 years ago. Robert backed him up immediately, saying I should share because family helps family, and I wanted to scream that family doesn't steal from each other, but I knew it was pointless. I drove straight to the police station and filed a report for the stolen laptop, but Officer Smith just looked tired when he took my statement and warned me that without proof Evan took it. Domestic disputes rarely lead to charges. He suggested I should just move out if things were that bad, not knowing I was trapped by a lease I'd co-signed with my mom 6 months ago when they refinanced the house. Everything felt stacked against me, the law, my parents, even the fact that I was financially tied to this house for another year at least. That evening I sat in my car in the office parking lot for 2 hours, too scared to go home, just sitting there scrolling through apartment listings I couldn't afford. Rebecca found me there at 8 when she was leaving and asked why I hadn't gone home yet, and when I told her I was scared she followed me all the way back to make sure I got inside safe. She waited in her car until I texted her that I was in my locked room, and that simple act of someone actually caring about my safety made me cry harder than I had in months. The next week dragged by with me checking my room for signs of entry every time I came home, running my hands along the doorframe for scratches and examining the lock for tampering. I finally called a security company and scheduled an installation, using the money I'd been saving for a new guitar to pay for cameras in my room and car instead. The technician who came was an older woman named Diane who took one look at my setup, asked if this was a domestic situation, and when I nodded, she quietly slipped me her personal number on a piece of paper while showing me how to access the footage remotely. Her knowing look stayed with me for days, like she'd seen this exact situation play out before and knew exactly how it would end. 3 days after the cameras went in, my phone started blowing up with messages from people I hadn't talked to since high school, all asking variations of "Are you okay?" and "Is everything alright at home?" Evan had started posting on Facebook and Instagram, sharing screenshots of text conversations that never happened, making it look like I threatened to hurt him and destroy his property. The messages were obviously edited, with fonts that didn't match and timestamps that made no sense, but people believed them anyway. My old college roommate messaged me saying she was worried about my mental health, and a coworker asked if I needed to talk to someone professional. Years of building my reputation as the stable, responsible one crumbled in less than a week. I woke up at 3 in the morning 5 days later to my car alarm going off, stumbling out of bed and grabbing my phone to check the camera feed before even looking out the window. The footage showed a figure in a dark hoodie slashing all 4 of my tires with what looked like a kitchen knife, and even though the hood covered their face, I recognized Evan's build and the way he walked with that slight lean to the left. I saved the footage to 3 different places before calling the police, who said they'd send someone in the morning, then went outside to see the damage myself. All 4 tires were completely destroyed, long gashes through the sidewalls that couldn't be patched. When I showed my parents the video at breakfast, Robert squinted at the screen and claimed it was too dark to identify anyone, while Linda suggested maybe I had enemies at work I didn't know about. The way they both avoided looking at me told me everything I needed to know about whose side they were on. 2 days later my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification from James Miller, the guy who bought my guitar, and my heart nearly stopped when I read his message admitting he still had it and felt guilty about the whole thing. He offered to sell it back to me for what he paid, $2,800, and I immediately agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown the next day. I was shaking as I typed my response, already planning to take out a loan if I had to, but 15 minutes later he sent another message saying he couldn't do it after all. Something had come up, sorry. Before I could even reply, his account showed as blocked, and I knew Evan had gotten to him somehow. Tyler found me crying in my car after that and climbed into the passenger seat without saying anything for a while, then told me he'd seen Evan going through the mail every day, taking anything that looked official and hiding it in his closet. He led me to Evan's room while our parents were at work and showed me a shoebox full of my mail, including 3 notices from my insurance company about my vandalism claim for the slashed tires, a letter from my bank about suspicious activity, and even a package slip for something I'd ordered weeks ago. My little brother's hands were shaking as he handed me the letters, and he made me promise not to tell anyone he'd shown me because he was scared of what Evan might do to him. The next morning I drove to Rebecca's apartment and asked if I could use her address for my mail, explaining just enough that she understood without asking too many questions. I spent the rest of that day opening a new bank account at a completely different bank across town, transferring most of my money over in small amounts so it wouldn't raise questions at home. These small acts of protecting myself felt like tiny victories, even though I had to keep acting normal at home, smiling at dinner and pretending everything was fine to avoid setting Evan off worse. A week later at Sunday dinner, while I was trying to eat despite my stomach churning, Evan casually mentioned he'd been looking into selling some vintage music memorabilia online, watching my face the whole time he talked. When I didn't react, just kept cutting my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, he pulled out his phone and showed Robert a photo of my guitar at James's house, claiming I'd given it away months ago and was now trying to make him look bad by saying he stole it. Robert nodded along while Linda murmured something about how we all need to be more careful with our belongings. 3 days after that, I was checking my bank account and noticed charges I didn't recognize, almost $3,000 in purchases from sneaker websites and electronic stores over the past 2 weeks. My hands went numb as I scrolled through transaction after transaction, all using my credit card number but shipped to addresses I didn't recognize. When I confronted Evan with the printed statements that Tyler had grabbed from the mailbox before Evan could steal them, he actually laughed in my face and said prove it wasn't me. Maybe I had a shopping addiction I was trying to blame on him. The credit card company said they needed a police report to investigate the fraud, so I drove straight to the police station and filed one, my hands shaking as I filled out form after form. Detective Maria Rodriguez was assigned to my case the next day, a woman in her 40s who took notes while I showed her everything, the security footage, the social media posts, the stolen mail, the credit card fraud, all of it laid out in chronological order. She looked at the timeline I'd created and nodded slowly, saying she'd seen this pattern of escalation before and would be interviewing Evan as part of her investigation. She told me to keep documenting everything, to save every piece of evidence, and mentioned that cases like this often got worse before they got better. By this point I'd lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks from not being able to eat, my stomach constantly in knots and food tasting like cardboard when I tried to force it down. Rebecca started bringing me lunch every day at work, sitting with me while I picked at sandwiches and tried to keep something down. Her worried looks making me realize how bad I must have looked. The stress gave me constant headaches that no amount of medication could touch, a dull throb behind my eyes that got worse every time my phone buzzed. I'd jump at every notification, my heart racing as I checked to see what Evan had done now, what new way he'd found to make my life hell while my parents stood by and watched. 3 weeks dragged by with this constant weight on my chest, jumping at every sound in the house, until Tyler pulled me aside one afternoon while our parents were out grocery shopping. He kept glancing over his shoulder as he told me Evan had been asking him weird questions about my work schedule, which friends I hung out with most, where I usually went on weekends. My little brother had been playing dumb, giving vague answers, but he could tell Evan was planning something bigger than just breaking my stuff. We sat in my room and worked out a simple code system using text messages, where sending a pizza emoji meant Evan was acting suspicious, a fire emoji meant immediate danger, and 3 exclamation marks meant call the police right away. The next morning I got served with legal papers at my front door by a process server who looked bored as he asked me to sign for them. Evan had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I was harassing him and making him feel unsafe in his own home. home. My hand shook as I read through the paperwork filled with lies about me threatening him, following him around the house, and creating a hostile living environment. The lawyer I called that afternoon explained this was a common tactic people use to build a paper trail that makes the other person look like the aggressor, especially when they're planning something worse. 2 weeks later at the courthouse, I sat with my lawyer watching Evan present edited videos to the judge where he'd cut out all his provocations and only showed my reactions, making me look unhinged. He had fake text messages printed out, witnesses who were just his sneaker buddies lying about things they'd never actually seen, and this whole sob story about living in fear of his stepsister. Just when I thought the judge might actually believe him, Detective Maria Rodriguez walked into the courtroom and asked to address the court. She stated there was an active police investigation into Evan for fraud, vandalism, and filing false police reports, presenting a thick folder of evidence to the judge. The judge's face went from sympathetic to stern as she reviewed the documents, then denied Evan's request and warned him that any further false reports would result in criminal charges. That evening Linda pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was making dinner, her face showing the first real crack in her denial as she asked if I really thought Evan was dangerous. I pulled out my phone and showed her the timeline I'd been keeping in a document, complete with dates, photos of damage, screenshots of threats, and police report numbers. She went pale reading through months of escalating incidents, her hands trembling as she scrolled, but when she handed the phone back she still insisted we needed to work this out as a family instead of getting the police more involved. Later that night I crept down the hallway to get water and heard Evan on the phone in his room, his voice carrying through the thin door as he told someone the detective was sniffing around and he needed to be smarter about things. I pressed record on my phone, catching him saying he'd have to wait for the heat to die down before making his next move, that he wasn't going to let some guitar-loving loser ruin his reputation. His voice had this edge of genuine worry I'd never heard before, the first sign that Maria's investigation was actually getting to him. 4 days later I was at work when Tyler called me crying so hard I could barely understand him at first. Evan had broken into my room while I was gone, spray-painted thief in huge red letters across all my walls, and smashed every piece of music equipment I had left including my practice amp and the keyboard I'd had since middle school. The security cameras I'd installed captured everything, but Evan had worn a ski mask and gloves like he thought he was in some crime movie. Tyler sobbed that Evan had made him watch the whole thing, threatening to break his gaming console if he tried to leave or call anyone. Maria came by that afternoon to review the footage, pointing out Evan's distinctive watch that he always wore and his limited edition sneakers that he kept one pair of. She said it was enough for a search warrant, but warned me the legal process could take several weeks to work through the system, maybe longer if Evan got a good lawyer. Meanwhile I had to sleep in a destroyed room that reeked of spray paint while my parents kept insisting it could have been anyone, maybe someone Evan knew who had a grudge against me, refusing to accept their son had done this. I started moving my important stuff to Rebecca's apartment across town, packing clothes and documents into boxes while my parents weren't home, but I kept coming back every day to maintain appearances and not give Evan the satisfaction of driving me out completely. Every night I'd lock my bedroom door and drag my heavy dresser in front of it, barely sleeping as I listened for footsteps in the hallway, feeling like I was living in a war zone where I was the only one who admitted we were under attack. A mutual friend called me one evening saying James Miller, the guy who bought my guitar, needed to talk to me urgently, but was too scared to reach out directly. James was terrified because Evan had been sending him threatening messages, demanding he never speak to me or the police about the guitar, promising to make his life hell if he cooperated with any investigation. James wanted to do the right thing and return the guitar or at least testify about what really happened, but he was genuinely afraid of what Evan might do to him or his property. I gave him Maria's direct number and told him she could protect witnesses, though honestly I wasn't sure how much protection she could really offer from someone who lived in the same house as me. The next morning Tyler showed me bruises on his upper arm, purple fingerprints where Evan had grabbed him hard when he tried to warn me about something Evan was planning. My protective instincts kicked in harder than my fear as I took photos of every bruise from multiple angles, adding them to the growing evidence file on my phone while Tyler tried not to cry. 6 weeks dragged by with me documenting every single thing Evan did, every threat he made, every time he got too close to Tyler, until the day I came home from grocery shopping to see black smoke pouring from our backyard. I dropped the bags on the driveway and ran around the house to find my entire professional portfolio, 5 years of marketing campaigns I designed, burning in a metal trash can while Evan stood there with a garden hose aimed at the grass around it. The leather binders were already melting, the printed designs curling into ash, my USB backup drives that I'd stupidly kept in the same portfolio case popping in the heat. I screamed at him to put it out, but he just shrugged and said he was preventing a fire hazard since I'd left all that paper lying around. Robert came out, saw the scene, and actually thanked Evan for being so safety conscious while I stood there shaking, watching my career literally turn to smoke. The next morning my boss called while I was trying to recreate my portfolio from old emails, her voice tight as she asked about threatening messages sent from my personal email account at 3 a.m. My stomach dropped as she read them out loud, horrible things about the company, about her personally, threats to leak client information if I didn't get a raise. I tried to explain it wasn't me but she said it had already confirmed the emails came from our home IP address and my account hadn't been hacked from outside. Evan must have gotten my password somehow, maybe from the sticky note I used to keep in my desk drawer before all this started. My boss said she'd give me one chance to explain to HR but her tone made it clear she didn't really believe me. Rebecca came over that night with her laptop and helped me apply for jobs in other cities, both of us knowing I couldn't actually leave until this mess was resolved but the fantasy of starting fresh somewhere helped. We sent applications to Seattle, Denver, Austin, anywhere far from this nightmare, and I let myself imagine an apartment where no one knew about the guitar or the sneakers or any of it. 3 days later Maria showed up with 4 other officers and a search warrant, going straight to Evan's room while he stood in the hallway screaming about his rights. They found the credit cards he'd opened in my name hidden in his closet, printed emails showing he'd been planning the portfolio burning for weeks, and my old laptop that had gone missing months ago with evidence he'd used it to send those work emails. They arrested him right there in the hallway, but within 2 hours Robert had bailed him out after emptying his entire retirement fund, and when they came home Linda wouldn't even look at me, like I was the one who betrayed the family by getting the police involved. The house turned into an icebox after that, nobody talking to me except Tyler who'd whisper updates about what he overheard, telling me Evan had convinced our parents that I'd planted all that evidence to frame him. They were talking about kicking me out, changing the locks while I was at work, anything to get their precious Evan away from the evil stepsister who was ruining his life. 2 months crawled by in this frozen hell until a process server knocked on our door and handed me papers for a civil lawsuit, Evan suing me for the $18,000 from his sneakers plus emotional distress. I actually laughed when I read it, the irony so thick I couldn't help it, him using my own successful revenge against me while the guitar he'd sold was worth a fraction of that. I found a lawyer named Catherine Walsh through a coworker's recommendation, a sharp woman who took one look at Evan's lawsuit and immediately spotted 3 different lies in his filing. She filed a countersuit for the guitar, the destroyed portfolio, the credit card fraud, and defamation from the work emails, warning me the legal bills would add up fast but I didn't care anymore. Tyler started recording conversations on his phone after that, scared but determined to help, and one night he got Robert and Evan discussing their plan to make me crack before trial. They talked about calling my work again, maybe showing up at Rebecca's house, anything to isolate me further and make me drop the lawsuit. Tyler's hands shook as he transferred the audio files to my phone, both of us knowing what would happen if they caught him. I couldn't let him stay in danger, so I called my aunt in Seattle and drove Tyler there myself despite my parents screaming that I had no right to take him anywhere. He hugged me tight at her door and whispered he'd testify if I needed him to. My little brother ready to stand up in court for me, and driving away from him felt like ripping out a piece of my heart, but at least he was safe. Back at the house with just my parents and Evan, I realized how completely alone I was now. Rebecca checking on me constantly through text but unable to come over after Robert banned her from the property. Evan's satisfaction was visible every time he passed my room, knowing he'd successfully driven away my last family ally. The psychological warfare shifting into its next phase with Tyler gone and me trapped in enemy territory. 10 weeks dragged by before the depositions finally started, and watching James squirm in his chair across from the lawyers made my stomach twist into knots. He kept wiping his palms on his jeans while the court reporter typed every word, his voice cracking when he admitted Evan had called him 3 times that day, pushing him to buy the guitar even after James asked if it was really Evan's to sell. The way James described it, Evan had laughed and said I'd never even noticed it was gone, that I was too busy with work to care about some old guitar gathering dust. Evan's lawyer jumped on that immediately, suggesting James was making up the pressure story to avoid his own legal problems, pointing out how convenient it was that James suddenly remembered these details after getting sued himself. The truth got buried under legal arguments about hearsay and credibility, with Evan's lawyer painting James as a liar trying to save his own skin while my lawyer tried to establish a pattern of manipulation. 2 days after James's testimony hit the court records, my phone exploded with texts from him at 3 in the morning. His voice shook when I finally answered, telling me Evan had posted his full name, address, and phone number on some sneaker forum, claiming James was a known thief who targeted collectors. Screenshots showed Evan's post calling James a rat who deserved whatever came to him, complete with James's family photos stolen from social media. James's mom had already gotten calls threatening to burn their house down. His little sister was too scared to go to school, and James himself hadn't slept in 48 hours. The collateral damage kept spreading like poison, with innocent people getting pulled into Evan's rage spiral just because they crossed paths with us. I'd been staying at Rebecca's apartment for weeks by then, only going back to the house once a week for an hour to grab mail and maintain legal residency for the case. Her spare bedroom became my whole world, with my laptop set up on a card table and my clothes in garbage bags since I couldn't risk going back for my suitcases. Those weekly visits home felt like entering a war zone, with Evan always finding excuses to be there when I arrived, standing in doorways just watching me sort through mail. My old bedroom didn't even feel like mine anymore, with scratches on the door from where he tried to pick the new lock I'd installed, and that sick cologne smell he wore seeping through the walls. I'd grab what I needed and leave within 20 minutes, my hands shaking until I got back to Rebecca's place where I could actually breathe again. Maria called me during one of those safe mornings at Rebecca's, her voice tight with barely contained anger as she explained what they'd found in Evan's background check. 2 arrests in California before he'd moved here, one for vandalizing an ex-girlfriend's car and another for harassing a former roommate who'd reported him for theft. Robert had known the whole time, had paid for lawyers to get the charges reduced, had moved Evan here to get him away from his problems. When Maria showed my mom the arrest records that afternoon, Linda's face went white as she read through the police reports. She called me crying an hour later, finally understanding that Evan's behavior wasn't some misunderstanding or sibling rivalry gone wrong. The next morning Linda showed up at Rebecca's apartment without warning, mascara streaking down her face as she stood in the doorway. She kept saying she'd been so scared of losing Robert, of being alone again, that she convinced herself Evan was just troubled, not dangerous. Her hand shook as she admitted she'd been choosing Robert's comfort over my safety for years, pretending not to see what Evan really was. When she reached for me, I let her hug me even though something inside me had broken beyond repair. She'd picked her husband over her daughter when it mattered most, and no amount of tears could fix that. 3 months had passed since the guitar case destruction when I got the call from building security that Evan was in the lobby of my office, demanding to see me. I watched on the security monitor as he paced back and forth, his face red and fists clenched, yelling at the guard that I destroyed his life. When security tried to escort him out, he started screaming loud enough for 3 floors to hear, calling me a lying witch who turned everyone against him. My coworkers pressed against the windows to watch security literally drag him out while he screamed that I'd pay for ruining everything. My boss pulled me aside afterward, his expression sympathetic but firm, suggesting maybe I should work from home full-time until this was resolved. The prosecutor called that evening to tell me they were adding witness intimidation charges based on James's evidence and the security footage from my office. She explained the case was building stronger every day, but warned me the trial wouldn't happen for at least 6 more months. The legal system moved at a crawl while I lived every day looking over my shoulder, checking locks twice, jumping at unexpected noises. Each court filing in motion felt like progress, but Evan was still out there on bail, getting angrier and more desperate as the walls closed in. Tyler called from Seattle while I was reviewing the new charges with my lawyer, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in years. He told me about his new school, how different everything was there, how his counselor was helping him understand that none of this was normal or okay. He joined the music program and was learning guitar, said it helped him feel connected to me even from far away. Hearing him thriving gave me strength to keep fighting, knowing that getting him away from this nightmare was worth every sacrifice. Catherine, my lawyer, called the next week with news that made my blood run cold. She discovered Evan had been hiding money in cryptocurrency accounts, thousands of dollars from selling things that weren't his over the years. There were receipts for items reported stolen from previous roommates, patterns going back 5 years of taking and selling other people's belongings. She warned me that as we uncovered more evidence, Evan would likely escalate, that cornered animals were the most dangerous. I hadn't touched a guitar in 4 months, hadn't even hummed along to the radio, because music had become tangled up with everything Evan had poisoned. Rebecca found me one night crying over old videos on my phone, watching myself perform at an open mic the year before everything went wrong. That girl in the video looked so happy, so confident, so unaware of what was coming. Rebecca sat with me and reminded me that girl was still inside somewhere, just protecting herself until it was safe to come back out. 4 months after the guitar case incident, Rebecca called me at 2 a.m. with her voice shaking. I could hear sirens in the background as she told me Evan had tried breaking into her apartment while she was sleeping. Her new security camera caught everything. Him kneeling at her door with lock picks, working on the deadbolt for 20 minutes before her neighbors heard the scratching and called 911. The cops found him still there, so focused on the lock he didn't even hear them coming up the stairs. They arrested him on the spot, and when they ran his name, they saw his previous bail status and immediately revoked it. Within hours he was back in jail, this time with no chance of getting out before trial. Robert showed up at my door the next morning, pounding so hard I thought he'd break it down. When I finally opened it, his face was red and twisted with rage. He screamed that I'd destroyed their family, that Evan was just pulling pranks and I'd turned it into something criminal. He kept yelling about how I was vindictive and cruel, how I'd ruined his son's life over nothing. Linda stood behind him in the hallway, not saying a word, just staring at the floor while he screamed at me for 15 minutes straight. I started seeing Dr. Patricia Kim the following week, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. She had this calm way of listening that made me feel heard for the first time in months. During our third session, she looked at me and said what I'd been needing to hear, that I wasn't crazy, that what my family was doing had a name: gaslighting. She explained how they'd been systematically undermining my reality, making me question my own experiences and feelings. Having a professional validate what I'd been going through felt like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for months. Around the same time, James Miller reached out through my lawyer. He'd heard about the trial and wanted to testify on my behalf despite all the harassment he'd been getting from Evan's friends. When we met at a coffee shop, he brought the guitar with him, still in perfect condition in a new case. He told me he'd been planning to return it once things calmed down because his conscience wouldn't let him keep something that clearly meant so much to someone. He'd kept every text and email from Evan about the sale, including ones where Evan bragged about taking it. Without permission, I flew to Seattle to visit Tyler 2 weeks later. Seeing him in his new environment was like watching a completely different person emerge. He was laughing with his roommates when I arrived, actually laughing, something I hadn't heard in over a year. His dorm room had music posters everywhere and a keyboard in the corner. He showed me a notebook full of song lyrics he'd been writing, pages and pages about standing up to bullies and finding your voice. He told me that watching me refuse to back down had inspired him to start writing again. One song was called Big Sister and I had to leave the room to cry after reading it. The call from Linda came 3 days after I got back from Seattle. Robert had filed for divorce, blaming me for everything that had happened with Evan. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her at first. The house was being sold, their joint accounts frozen, and Robert had moved out that morning. She kept saying she'd chosen wrong, that she should have protected me and Tyler, but then in the same breath she begged me to lie at Evan's trial, to say it was all a misunderstanding. When I said no, she hung up on me. Catherine, my lawyer, spent weeks putting together our case file for the trial. The documented damages came to over $50,000 when you added up the destroyed guitar, the credit fraud Evan had committed using my information, the therapy costs, and lost wages from job hunting after he'd sabotaged my previous job applications. She had receipts, photos, police reports, witness statements, everything organized in color-coded folders. Evan's lawyer kept arguing for mental health considerations, saying Evan had been under stress from family pressure, but Catherine had responses ready for every excuse. I went back to pack up my childhood room while the house was being prepared for sale. Linda watched from the doorway as I wrapped each item in newspaper and placed it in boxes. Neither of us spoke for the entire 3 hours I was there. Every poster I took down, every book I packed, felt like accepting that the family I'd grown up with was gone forever. The room looked so small and empty when I finished, nothing like the sanctuary it had been for 23 years. Dr. Patricia helped me write my victim impact statement over several sessions. Putting everything into words for the court was harder than I expected. Each sentence felt like reopening wounds that hadn't fully healed yet. She reminded me that this was my chance to tell my truth in a place where it couldn't be dismissed or minimized. We went through 15 drafts before I had something that captured even half of what this had done to me. Rebecca and I found an apartment together the week before the trial was set to begin. It was smaller than either of our previous places, but it had good locks, security cameras, and most importantly, no connection to my family. We spent the first weekend painting the walls a soft blue color. As I rolled paint onto walls that had never been vandalized, never been broken into, never held violence or threats, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. That first night in the new place, I didn't barricade my door or check the locks 5 times or wake up at every small sound. I just slept straight through until morning. 6 months passed before I finally got the call that the criminal trial was starting. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Evan in an orange jumpsuit sitting at the defendant's table made my stomach twist in ways I didn't expect. He turned when I entered and the look in his eyes was pure hatred, so intense that the bailiff actually stepped between us and stayed there. The prosecutor had warned me this would be hard, but I hadn't really understood until that moment. I took my seat in the witness section and watched as the jury filed in, 12 people who would decide if Evan would face real consequences for everything he'd done. The first day was mostly jury selection and opening statements, but on the second day they called me to testify. I was on that stand for 4 hours straight, walking through every single incident with dates and evidence and receipts. The prosecutor had me describe finding my guitar missing, the destroyed case in the driveway, the break-ins, the vandalism, everything documented with photos and police reports. Evan's lawyer tried to make me look bad by bringing up the sneakers, asking if I'd sold them out of spite, if I was just trying to get revenge. I kept my voice steady and told him I was teaching Evan the consequences his parents never bothered with. During the lunch recess on my second day of testimony, someone tapped my shoulder in the hallway. James stood there holding a guitar case, and before I could say anything he opened it to show my signed guitar inside, perfectly preserved like nothing had ever happened to it. He wouldn't take the money I tried to give him, just said returning it was his way of apologizing for buying stolen property in the first place. I stood there in that courthouse hallway crying while holding my guitar, feeling like I'd gotten back a piece of my soul I thought was gone forever. The trial continued and Tyler testified the next day via video link since he was still too scared to be in the same room as Evan. His testimony was devastating as he described the threats Evan made, the violence he witnessed, how scared he was in his own home. Even Evan's lawyer seemed affected by Tyler's testimony, and Robert actually got up and stormed out when Tyler talked about being afraid to sleep at night. Detective Rodriguez took the stand after Tyler and presented all the digital evidence they'd collected. Security footage from neighbors showing Evan at my apartment during the break-ins, financial records proving he'd sold my belongings, threatening text messages he'd sent me and Tyler, voicemails where he described exactly what he planned to do to us. The prosecution built their case piece by piece, showing a clear pattern of escalating harassment and fraud that Evan couldn't explain away. Each new piece of evidence made Evan's defense crumble more until his lawyer was basically just trying to minimize the damage. Linda took the stand as a witness on day 5 and it was painful to watch. She wasn't testifying for the prosecution or defense, just as a witness, and her testimony was all over the place. She kept trying to protect everyone at once, saying Evan didn't mean it, but also that I was a good daughter, but also that we should have worked it out as a family. The prosecutor and defense attorney both looked frustrated as she contradicted herself over and over, destroying her own credibility with every answer. I actually felt sorry for her watching her fall apart up there, still trying to keep everyone happy even in a courtroom. Then Evan decided to take the stand against his lawyer's advice because of course he did. His narcissism wouldn't let him stay quiet and he demanded to tell his side of the story. He admitted to everything but tried to frame it as justified retaliation, actually telling the jury with a straight face that I started it by selling his sneakers. He went on for an hour about how I'd ruined his life, destroyed his reputation, turned his family against him, all because of some stupid guitar. The prosecutor barely had to cross-examine him because Evan was doing all the damage himself, his entitlement on full display for everyone to see. When the prosecutor asked him if he felt any remorse, Evan said I should be the one apologizing to him. The jury only took 3 hours to deliberate before coming back with their verdict. Guilty on all counts including vandalism, fraud, harassment, and witness intimidation. Evan's face when they read the verdict was pure shock, like he genuinely never believed there would be real consequences for his actions. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and revoked Evan's bail, meaning he'd stay in jail until then. Robert didn't even look at his son as the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs. My lawyer Catherine called me that evening with more good news about the civil case. The insurance company and Evan's remaining assets would cover most of my damages from the apartment destruction and stolen items. It wasn't really about the money though. It was about the legal system finally validating that I was the victim here, not the bad guy Evan and his dad tried to paint me as. A week after the verdict, I sat in Rebecca's living room with my recovered guitar for the first time since getting it back. My fingers found the familiar chords and I played quietly, just simple songs I'd learned years ago. The music sounded different now, sadder but somehow stronger, like it had been through hell and come out the other side just like me. 8 months later, I stood at the podium in the courthouse reading my impact statement while Evan sat in his orange jumpsuit staring at the table. My hand shook as I described how he didn't just steal a guitar but taught me that family could betray you deeper than any stranger ever could. I told the judge about the months of nightmares, the therapy sessions, the way I still flinched when someone knocked on my door. The court psychologist had already testified about Evan's evaluation results, explaining his narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features and how he showed zero real remorse during their sessions. She said treatment was recommended but the prognosis wasn't good since Evan kept insisting he was the real victim here. When the judge announced 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and full restitution, Robert jumped up screaming that I destroyed a young man's life. The bailiff had to escort him out while he kept yelling about how Evan was only 25 and didn't deserve this. Linda found me in the hallway after, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past few months. She told me she was starting therapy to understand how she let this happen, how she enabled him for so long. I said I hope she found peace, but we both knew things between us were broken beyond repair. Back at Rebecca's place that night, I sat on her couch feeling empty instead of victorious. Patricia, my therapist, had warned me about this, said healing wasn't a straight line and I was allowed to grieve the family I should have had. The next month Tyler called to say he was staying in Seattle permanently with our aunt. He was doing great in his new school but couldn't come back to Portland because there were too many bad memories here. Another thing Evan had taken from me. I went back to work full time but my coworkers treated me differently now, careful and quiet like I might break. The office gossip about my crazy stepbrother who went to prison would fade eventually but the label felt permanent. Then Robert had his lawyer send a letter demanding I pay for Evan's commissary account in prison. Catherine, my lawyer, sent back a cease and desist warning them about harassment charges if they contacted me again. A few weeks later James Miller reached out asking if we could meet for coffee. We sat at a quiet cafe while he apologized again, explaining how Evan had manipulated him too with sob stories about needing money for medical bills. We weren't friends but there was understanding between us. Both of us had been caught in Evan's web of lies. I started teaching guitar lessons to kids at the community center on weekends, using what I knew about music to build something positive. The first time a 7-year-old successfully played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and beamed up at me, I felt a tiny piece of myself that Evan tried to destroy starting to heal. The months that followed brought a strange kind of peace until my phone buzzed one morning with an email from the prosecutor's office. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor as I read the words about Evan getting early release for good behavior. My hand shook but something inside me had changed since that day in the driveway. I wasn't the scared person who froze anymore. I cleaned up the broken pieces and called Rebecca immediately. She got me in touch with a prosecutor who helped me file for a permanent restraining order before Evan could get out. The judge who had seen our case before signed it without hesitation. 500 feet minimum distance from me, my home, and my workplace. The therapist I'd been seeing helped me create a safety plan with specific steps for different situations. Rebecca came over and installed new cameras and a better alarm system while I watched her work. She showed me how to use the panic button that connected directly to the police. I told my coworkers about the situation and they promised to watch for anyone suspicious. This wasn't living in fear. This was being smart and prepared. 3 days before his release Linda called me crying. Robert was picking Evan up and they were moving to California immediately. She was staying in Portland alone in their old house. Her voice got quiet when she asked if maybe someday we could talk about everything. I told her I wished her well but I wasn't ready for someday yet. The next afternoon I stopped at the gas station near my apartment to fill up my tank. Movement caught my eye and there was Evan walking toward me from the store entrance. My hand went straight to my phone and he saw it. He stopped about 20 feet away and that familiar smirk crossed his face. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds before he turned and walked back to a car where Robert was waiting. They drove away and I knew we both understood who had really won. Life moved forward after that. Tyler came to visit for my 24th birthday and I barely recognized him at first. He'd grown 3 inches taller and carried himself differently. We sat in my living room and he told me about his college essay. He'd written about courage and watching his sister refuse to be silenced by family betrayal. He pulled out his guitar and we played together for the first time since everything happened. His fingers moved across the strings with confidence I'd never seen before. 2 weeks later a certified letter arrived from Evan's probation officer. Inside was a typed apology that Evan was required to send as part of his probation terms. The words about regret and moving forward were clearly written by someone else. Empty phrases about understanding the harm he'd caused and taking responsibility. I filed it in the box with all the other legal documents from the case. Linda sent a birthday card a month late with a check for $3,000 inside. Her note said it was payment for the guitar she should have protected. I looked at the check for a long time before driving to the domestic violence shelter downtown. They were grateful for the donation and I knew some debts couldn't be fixed with money. At my next therapy session the counselor pointed out I hadn't mentioned Evan's name in over a month. She was right and I hadn't even noticed. He was becoming something that happened to me instead of something still happening. The healing wasn't complete and maybe never would be but it was real and it was mine. 6 months passed before I felt ready to play music in public again. The coffee shop's open mic night was packed but I signed up anyway. My hand shook as I adjusted the microphone and looked out at all those faces. I played the song I'd written about surviving when family becomes the enemy. The notes weren't perfect and my voice cracked once but when I finished the room was quiet for a moment before people started clapping. Not with pity but with understanding. Someone in the back wiped their eyes and nodded at me like they knew exactly what those words meant. That night changed something in me because I stopped hiding what happened and started owning my story. 3 months later Rebecca and I cooked our first Thanksgiving dinner in my small apartment with Tyler helping set the table while our aunt flew in from Seattle. We made way too much food for just the 4 of us but nobody talked about the empty chairs where Mom and Robert should have been sitting. Tyler carved the turkey with this huge grin on his face and kept making jokes about how we were like those sitcom families who choose each other. Our aunt brought photo albums from before the divorce and we spent hours looking at pictures of Dad while Tyler asked questions he'd been too young to remember the answers to. Rebecca's girlfriend stopped by with dessert and stayed until midnight playing board games while we all got competitive over Monopoly. My boss called me into her office the next week and offered me the senior position I've been working toward for 2 years. She said something about admiring how I handled pressure but I think she just noticed I'd been putting in extra hours since everything went down. The raise was enough that I could finally start saving again instead of just paying Patricia every week for therapy sessions. James sent me a message on social media about 6 months after that, saying he'd started a support group for people who'd been manipulated by family members. He asked if I wanted to come speak but I typed back that I wasn't ready to be anyone's cautionary tale yet. Tyler showed up at my door one afternoon practically bouncing with his early acceptance letter to the State University for Psychology. He joked that our messed up family gave him enough material for his entire dissertation but I could see how proud he was underneath the humor. I used my first bonus check to buy a new guitar from the music store downtown. Not some fancy signed one but a regular acoustic that felt good in my hands. Patricia watched me walk into her office carrying the guitar case and suggested we move to monthly sessions since I seemed to be doing better. Rebecca came over with boxes and bubble wrap saying her girlfriend got a job across town and they were moving in together. She kept apologizing like she was abandoning me but I helped her pack while we listened to music and talked about paint colors for their new place. I found the old family photo while cleaning out a drawer, all 6 of us at Tyler's middle school graduation looking happy and normal. Instead of ripping it up I put it in a box with other things from before, not because I wanted to keep looking at it but because pretending it never happened felt like lying. Tyler sent me a video from his phone of him playing guitar at the school talent show with a message saying he dedicated it to me. I watched him on that little stage playing the chords I'd taught him and realized he'd gotten better than me without my noticing. 2 years after Evan destroyed everything, I sat in my new apartment with the guitar on my lap playing songs I'd been writing. The signed guitar hung on the wall next to my diploma and some concert posters, out of its case and part of the room instead of hidden away. My phone lit up with Tyler asking about summer plans and Rebecca sending stupid memes while my neighbor knocked asking if I gave lessons to her kid. I told her yes and scheduled the first lesson for next week because teaching felt like something I could do now. The funny thing is I barely think about Evan anymore except when someone asks about the guitar on the wall and I tell them the short version. Life kept going after he tried to break me and now I have this whole life he's not part of where I play music and teach kids and of people who chose to be my family. I am the main character of my own story now and he's just a chapter I had to get through to become who I was supposed to be.